All right, good morning, Reach Church. Super glad to be here. Glad to see you here as well. My name is Cullen. I'm the lead pastor. If I didn't get a chance to meet you, I would love to do that right after the service today. And, I was thinking about, when I was in college, I would come home during the summers and I would work for the county road department. So I grew up in Texas. So when I would come home from college, I would come back to Texas. And that's the road department that I would work for in Southeast Texas. And a lot of the work that we did involved patching holes on roads around the county. And then sometimes I would even operate heavy equipment as well. It's really surprising that anybody would allow me to operate heavy equipment. So I don't know what they were thinking, or maybe they weren't thinking when they did that. But then I also did whatever the other employees would ask me to do. I was the youngest one there, so whatever they asked me to do, I would just do it. Now, there was an area in one of our big warehouses, because we had a number of warehouses that where equipment was and supplies. In this one particular warehouse, there were supplies in this area where things like paper towels were stored, toilet paper, different kinds of soaps, quarts of oil, things like that. And one of the things that really surprised me was to see employees sometimes taking those items home like it was a grocery store. They'd go by there and grab the items, put it in a little whatever, and maybe they just put it in their arms, they'd carry it to their car. And I was always looking at that, I was like, what is going on? That's a little strange. So one day I asked one of them, and I said, hey, I see this happening, like, people taking these items, putting them in their car. Hey, what's going on? And they told me, they're like, well, yeah, we just need these supplies. We can use them at home, so we just grab them. I was like, wait, so you're stealing from the county? Is that what you're doing? And they looked at me and they said, no. I pay taxes, so I have a right to take these things home. I was like, what? Really? Are you serious? And they said, you pay taxes too. You should take some of these home. And I was like, no, I don't think so. I don't think I'll take any of those home. I don't think I'll steal anything, from the county. So what was going on there? Well, they actually felt entitled. They felt entitled, so they were stealing things, taking things from the county. So what's entitlement? Well, we'll put a definition of entitlement there on the screen. So entitlement, as far as what we're talking about here today, is the belief or sense that someone is deserving of certain privileges, possessions, treatment, or experiences. Okay, or the belief that they have a right to do whatever they want to do, whatever they want to do it. Entitlement. Yeah, so it can come in all kinds of forms, like maybe, well, I deserve this. I deserve that raise. I deserve a raise, come on. Or I deserve the attention in this certain area of my life. Or I deserve to get into that school. There's no way they should ever tell me no. I can't believe they would reject me. I deserve to get into that school. Or I deserve this kind of relationship. Or I deserve to be with this person. Or I deserve to drive that kind of car. Or I deserve this kind of respect. Or I deserve a bigger piece of pie than you. Or I deserve whatever. I mean, you kind of get the point. You get the picture. But did you know that living with a sense of entitlement produces less satisfaction in life? It produces less satisfaction and not more satisfaction. And this is what we're going to talk about today. I think there's a pretty big sense of entitlement that exists in our culture right now. Have you noticed that? Yeah. This is the second week of our series called You Do You. And even the mentality of you do you, it can stir up a sense of entitlement. We hear it all the time in our culture. Hey, do whatever makes you happy. Follow your passions. Do what feels best to you. And you do you, this whole idea can stir up the belief that we deserve certain privileges. We deserve the possessions or certain treatments or certain experiences in life, or that we have a right to whatever we want whenever we want it. But the truth is, living with a sense of entitlement produces less satisfaction instead of more satisfaction in life. And there's probably areas of entitlement and different degrees of entitlement that we could find in each of us, me included. Even if it's just trace elements, even some small elements, or maybe big elements of entitlement, large areas. Maybe we recognize they're there, maybe we don't even recognize that they're there. But either way, it's reducing our satisfaction in life, whether we realize it or not. At the end of the day, wouldn't you like to know how to increase your satisfaction levels in life? I know I would. I'd like that. Wouldn't you like to know how to get away from the enemy that's trying to destroy your soul called entitlement? Because it does. It destroys us. Wouldn't you like to know how to live even more free than what you're living right now? Yeah. Now, I realize this is kind of a hot button issue in our culture right now. And we want to look at things, whatever we're looking at, through the lens of what the Bible is saying to us, because that's God's word and his instructions to us, to me, to you. And that really represents the best way for us to live. And because of the nature of this topic today, I realize that this message may be a little bit uncomfortable. Okay, because the truth of God's word can bring things to surface inside of us and show us things. And we can often feel the conviction of the Holy Spirit in these moments, which can actually draw us closer to God. And that's a good thing. The conviction of the Holy Spirit's a good thing in us. So I encourage you to open up your heart this morning and allow God to speak to you through this message. Can we do that? Is that good? Awesome. All right, so let's do that as we continue in our journey through the book of 1 Corinthians, which is a letter written by the Apostle Paul to the church in Corinth. We're now in chapter 9, and this is what Paul says, starting with verse 1. He says, "Am I not as free as anyone else? Am I not an apostle? Haven't I seen Jesus our Lord with my own eyes? Isn't it because of my work that you belong to the Lord? Even if others think I am not an apostle, I certainly am to you. You yourselves are proof that I am the Lord's apostle. This is my answer to those who question my authority." Now, a lot of key thoughts from the message today I would say, is influenced by the Word of the Cross commentary that I particularly studied on this passage. And if you're wondering why Paul is saying these things in these verses we just read, it's because there is a sense of entitlement going on in the Corinthian church that he's talking to. Okay, they believe they are entitled to a certain type of leader, and Paul, he doesn't measure up to their qualifications or their expectations or their rights that they feel that they have. And they actually feel that the world in some ways should revolve around them, around their desires, around their preferences, around their opinions. Yeah. Do you know anybody like that in your life? Anybody like that, they just feel like the world should revolve around them? Anybody know somebody like that? Don't look at them right now. But don't say their name or anything like that. But the Corinthians, they felt like they deserved a different experience than the experience they were currently living in. They felt like Paul should change his personality, he should change his style, he should change his approach, his philosophy, his ministry, all this stuff to accommodate what they wanted. So what's that all about? Entitlement. Yeah, they struggled with a strong sense of entitlement. And living with the sense of entitlement produces less satisfaction in life instead of more satisfaction in life. So now we're going to look at how entitlement produces less satisfaction and what we can do to live free from the chains of entitlement. Okay, the first thing we see is this. The first thing we see is that entitlement is just flat out dangerous. Okay, it is dangerous. And if we look back at verse 3 again in the New Living Translation, Paul says, "This is my answer to those who question my authority." Well, the New International Version says, "This is my defense to those who sit in judgment on me." Well, the original language in this verse uses legal terminology, so I like that translation where it says, "those who sit in judgment on me," because that's the legal terminology. And it communicates that Paul is basically being put on trial by the Corinthian church. He's being examined or he's being judged, and so he's having to defend himself. Now think of it like this. When somebody doesn't fit our expectations or the outline that we have in our mind or our narrative or whatever it is, then we examine them or we judge them like Paul was being judged. We often do that with people, mentally, maybe emotionally. And if there's somebody like that in our life, we can often read things into their text messages that maybe aren't really being said. We read extra stuff into those messages, and maybe we make them say stuff they're not really saying. Or we feel tension when we're physically around these people. You know, it makes things awkward. We might even put on a fake smile. You know, just because it's awkward. Why does this happen? Well, sometimes it happens because we're putting them on trial for not fitting our story that we feel we're entitled to have about them. Yeah, our filters actually cancel them out of our life. Well, the Corinthians are using filters to cancel out Paul from their life. If you look back at verse 1, Paul said this. He said, am I not as free as anybody else? Am I not an apostle? Haven't I seen Jesus with my own eyes? Isn't it because of my work that you belong to the Lord? So what are they doing here? So they're attacking his ministry methods. He said, am I not free? They're attacking his calling. He goes, guys, I'm an apostle. Come on. They're attacking his validity. He said, I've actually seen Jesus like on the road to Damascus, like I had this vision of Jesus, like this is legit. And they're attacking the impact he's had on their lives. He clearly says, it's because of my work that you even belong to the Lord. That's why you're here, because of my work, like I planted the church. They believed they were entitled to some kind of super leader, like the strong, impressive guy, you know, charismatic, eloquent, popular, culturally relevant, maybe good looking. They wanted to identify with somebody who is respected, who is well known, who is philosophical like their culture. But Paul just didn't have these qualities about him. This wasn't Paul. So he didn't fit their expectations. And they also wanted somebody they could control. You see, speakers in that culture, they made their living by collecting money and staying in people's homes. That's how they did that. And this gave wealthy people leverage and influence with those leaders because there was this relational debt that was created which equaled control, right? The leader would have to depend on the wealthy person for support and their well-being, and they stayed in their house. And then the wealthy person could use that to leverage control over these individuals. Well, so the Corinthians, they wanted a respectable leader that fit their paradigm, okay, that their entitlement paradigm, and one they could also control. But with Paul, they felt like they didn't have either of those. Okay, he wasn't very appealing, and he couldn't be controlled because he was not accepting their money. So he couldn't be controlled. So their entitlement caused them to cancel Paul out of their lives. Okay, they were kind of like, we're entitled to this certain kind of leader here at our church. So if you don't change to fit our expectations, then you're out. You're canceled. You're done. And that kind of stuff is dangerous. It reminds me of a story I read from an author. This author had graduated college and was doing an internship at a church an hour and a half from where they lived. So they drove there 3 times a week, and they did this, week after week after week. And after a while, they just started to kind of feel entitled. This intern started to feel entitled. And they were like, they were thinking this, like, do these people have any idea how much I'm sacrificing to be an intern here and to put this effort into this? Do they see all the work that I'm doing? I deserve something more than this. They begin to feel this way and think this way. Well, a few weeks later, a couple in the church approached this intern and they said, hey, we think it'd be good for you to get away, You need to commute less. Why don't you just stay at our place and relax? You can watch our dogs while you do this. There's food in the fridge. We're going to be gone for a week, and then you'll love it. This will just be a nice little kind of thing for you. Then the intern thought, great. This is just what I needed. This is perfect, okay? But the intern said this. The intern said in this story, it turned out to be a week from hell. That's what they said in their story, okay? What happened? They said the dogs were these enormous breed of dogs that barked all night long, wouldn't leave them alone. They couldn't even get any sleep. Anybody have a dog like that? Got a dog that barks all, big dog maybe. Okay. Anybody's neighbor have a dog like that? Yeah. And they said they needed to walk these dogs multiple times a day. And they said one of them got away during the middle of the night. And then this intern ran around in their pajamas for an hour and a half in the rain, trying to get these dogs back into the house. They said it was terrible, okay? And then after all this, things just kept happening, and the couple finally returned after being gone for a week. And they said, hey, thanks for being here. Hopefully you enjoyed it. And that was it. But the intern felt entitled to something more than that. They were thinking, you're going to give me some money, you're going to give me something, like what? They felt entitled, even though nothing more had been promised in that situation. Nothing more had been promised. They just felt entitled. It didn't fit his expectations. And this is a great example of the dangers of entitlement, because the dangers of entitlement it does a number of things. The first thing entitlement does, and the danger, is that it distorts reality. It distorts reality for us. See, when we have an inflated view of ourselves, it puts us in a position of deserving, and we believe that everybody owes us something. We walk around living life like everybody owes us. You owe me, everybody owes me something. We can't see clearly, and we think that others are in debt to us. Like, you owe me recognition. You owe me more time off. You owe me more attention in our relationship. And we carry all these things with us. You owe me more money. We feel that way. You owe me more affection. You owe me more respect. You owe me better support. Yeah, we can feel that way from those closest to us, from those distant from us, from family members and friends. This is what was happening in the mind of the intern after staying at that couple's house. He thought the couple owed him something more than what was promised. This is what was happening at Corinth in Paul's situation. They couldn't see straight, and they thought Paul owed it to them to change to fit their expectations. That's a danger of entitlement. Another danger of entitlement is that entitlement prevents us from receiving. When we walk around and entitled, we cannot receive. In the story of the intern, he was given free food, free lodging for a week. He saved on gas money, saved on travel time, but he couldn't see what he actually had. He couldn't see what he had received because all he saw was what he didn't get. And when we walk around with entitlement, all we see is what we don't have. All what we see is what we didn't get, not what we do have. And this is just like the Corinthians. They had been given the gospel and one of the greatest leaders in the history of the church, the Apostle Paul, but their entitlement prevented them from receiving the amazing gift that they had been given. They couldn't see it. When we're entitled, we actually cannot clearly see what we've been given. It's right there. It's amazing. For us, maybe we can't see that our marriage might be a whole lot better than what we think it is. Because we think we deserve somebody better, so we can appreciate them for who they are. Just saying. I mean, maybe we can't see our kids as blessings sometimes because we think we deserve kids who are easier to parent. I deserve somebody who's easier. So we can't see them for the blessings that they are. Or we don't appreciate our clothes that we have, or a car that we drive, or other possessions. We don't appreciate that because we think we deserve something that's better. We deserve something that's more attractive. We deserve something that's higher end or whatever it is, and we can't appreciate and see what we do have. Or we don't appreciate our job because we think we deserve a better job. Or we think we deserve more money. Or we don't appreciate our time off or our vacations because we think we deserve more or we deserve better experiences. And so we can just live not appreciating the things that we do have because we're so entitled to what we don't have. And so we can't see clearly. We can't see what we have. We can't see life clearly. And then another danger of entitlement is entitlement turns us against others. The family in the story, they were trying to help the intern. They thought, we could help you out by doing this. But instead, they became the villains. They were the bad people in the end of the story. They became the enemy. Well, the Corinthians did the same thing with Paul. Paul was trying to help them, And he actually did. He was the one who started the church. Their faith was because Paul introduced them to Jesus, but they turned on him and they put him on trial instead. The same thing happens with us. The friend who we hang out with, they add value to our life, somehow becomes the enemy because they didn't use the right tone of voice, or they say something we didn't like, it wasn't what we expected, and all of a sudden they become an enemy. Or the teacher, or a pastor, or a leader who adds value to our life somehow becomes a villain. They become an enemy because they didn't come through in the situation like we expected them to. And then we walk around with some kind of hurt and we blame that on another person. Happens all the time. Or everyday situations, the server at a restaurant, or the cashier at a store, the flight attendant on the airplane, all people who are serving you. They become an enemy when they don't provide the service we expected of them. So we let them have it with an attitude, or we let them have it with not so friendly words because we're entitled to something better. Can you see how a sense of entitlement produces less satisfaction in life instead of more satisfaction? I have seen people who, you might look at these people and it seems like they have everything. All the material possessions, all this and all that. And they are miserable people in life because they live with a sense of entitlement. Then I've seen people who have very little. You look at what they have and it's hardly anything, but they live with joy and their life is amazing because they don't live with the sense of entitlement. Can you see the difference? It's huge. So the next thing we're going to look at here with entitlement is the fact that entitlement actually has two sides to it. Not just one side, but two sides. Paul basically says to the Corinthians, you want to talk about entitlement? You want to talk about rights? You want to talk about what you deserve? Let's go. Come on, let's go. Well, we'll talk about it. Let's do it. So he says in verses 4 through 7, don't we have the right to live in your homes and share your meals? Don't we have the right to bring a believing wife with us as the other apostles and the Lord's brothers do and as Peter does? Or is it only Barnabas and I who have to work to support ourselves? What soldier has to pay his own expenses? What farmer plants a vineyard and doesn't have the right to eat some of its fruit? What shepherd cares for a flock of sheep and isn't allowed to drink some of the milk? So he tells them that he has every right to make money in the course of doing ministry. What he's doing is legitimate. It's his work that God's called him to. So this is the principle of what we'll call like practical work principle, okay? When you work, you have a right to make money. Agreed? Of course. Soldiers, they get paid for what they do. He says farmers, they eat what they plant. It's their compensation. Shepherds, they drink the milk that their flocks produce. He goes, yes, this should be the way it is. And then Paul says in verses 8 through 10, am I expressing merely a human opinion, or does the law say the same thing? For the law of Moses says, you must not muzzle an ox to keep it from eating as it treads out the grain. So don't keep an ox from eating as it performs its work, is what he's saying. Was God only thinking about oxen when he said this? Wasn't he actually speaking to us? Yes, it was written for us so that the one who plows and the one who threshes grain might both expect a share of the harvest. This is the principle of scriptural precedence. Because Paul refers back to scripture written in Deuteronomy chapter 25, part of the Old Testament, to show that people who work, when you do labor, okay, and even animals, when they do work, when they do labor, they have a right to get payment, even if that payment is food for the work that they're actually doing. And if animals have that right, then certainly people have that right too. Then he goes on to say in verse 11 and 12, since we have planted spiritual seed among you, aren't we entitled to a harvest of physical food and drink? If you support others who preach to you, shouldn't we have an even greater right to be supported? But we have never used this right. We would rather put up with anything than be an obstacle to the good news about Jesus. Now, this is the principle of what I'm going to call common sense. Okay, Paul says, if you invest in spiritual work, then you have a right to receive material compensation. What he's saying to the Corinthians is, yeah, your logic makes sense. You're right. I'm entitled to your money. That's the way the world works. You put your time in, you do your work, you get paid. And then he says in verse 13, Don't you realize that those who work in the temple get their meals from the offerings brought to the temple? And those who serve at the altar get a share of the sacrificial offerings. This is the principle of a religious custom. He's basically saying, hey, pick a religion, whatever religion you want to pick. He says, go to the Jewish temple. You're going to find priests. He said, or go walk around in downtown Corinth and see all the idol temples there. You'll find those kind of priests at those temples as well. Then he says, go to like a Lutheran church, a Presbyterian church, maybe in our culture, right? And you'll find pastors, whatever. But they are entitled to resources and compensation from the places where they work. Yeah. And then finally, he says, verse 14, in the same way, the Lord ordered that those who preach the good news should be supported by those who benefit from it. This is a principle from Jesus. Because Jesus himself said that those who preach the gospel should make their living from the gospel. Well, so what does that mean for you? What does that mean for us? Well, as human beings, we have basic, inalienable rights. Okay? We have the rights of a nation. We have the entitlements of the law. We have a right not to be enslaved. We deserve not to be lied to. Yeah, we deserve not to be cheated. We deserve to earn a decent wage for the work that we do. However, we typically only think of entitlement from that one side. But there's another side to entitlement. Here's the other side to entitlement. People also deserve to be punished for lying. That's the other deserve there. That's the other side of entitlement we don't talk about. People deserve consequences for cheating. That's the other side of entitlement. They deserve to be fired for trying to get paid for work they didn't really do. That's the other side of entitlement. You see, entitlement only fully works if everything is perfectly balanced on both sides. So I have with me a little kid's scale here today, all right? To show us that entitlement only really works if it's perfectly balanced on both sides. That's the only way it works. And I need a little help with me today to show us this principle. And so I have some help in the form of M&Ms. Anybody like M&Ms here today? So, say you prefer regular M&Ms. Come on, let me see your hand. You're a regular M&Ms kind of person. All right, okay. How many of you would say you are a peanut M&Ms kind of person? Come on. Whoa, look at that. Wow, I think we have a peanut M&Ms crowd here today. Yeah, you know, the peanut M&Ms people seem to be a little bit more passionate about their M&Ms. It was kind of like, yeah, like peanut M&Ms. Can I tell you, I'm a peanut M&Ms fan myself. Yeah. How many of you would like to eat some M&Ms here today? Yeah, I'm opening these up. You think I'm going to serve you some M&Ms, don't you? You're wrong. I'm going to eat one. Yeah, all right. Okay, so let's kind of look at this together, okay? Because entitlement, again, is stuck in my teeth. That's why I didn't eat the peanut one. I'd still be chewing on it right now. But everything has to be perfectly balanced, okay, for entitlement to really work. So we have a right not to be lied to. Okay, that's one of the sides, right? That's what we think of. I'm entitled not to be lied to, so we think of that, yeah. But then we want the ability to tell some small lies, right, every now and then just to get out of something. Well, I got to get out of this, so, let me tell some small lies. I just want that ability every now and then, okay? And then maybe we're stuck in a certain situation. Well, I'm really stuck here, so I kind of want to tell, got to get my way out of it. So I want to tell a few more lies, right? But that's not full entitlement because we don't want to incur the consequences for the lies we tell, right? We don't want that side of entitlement. We don't want to experience that. And because of that, it's not a balanced scale. It just can't work that way. That's not full scope entitlement. Another example is we have a right to expect people to do an honest day's work, okay? So we're entitled to expect people to do an honest day's work, all right? But for us, we feel entitled to cut corners on the job. Maybe because we got to just get things done more quickly. It's just kind of inconvenient or whatever. So we want the ability to cut some corners on the job on our end. Or we feel entitled to, man, there's a position that I really want. And, I'm entitled to this position. But to do there, I got to cut some corners to kind of get ahead so I can kind of get this position. And so we do that. But can I tell you, that's not full entitlement, because we don't want to include the consequences of our actions when we do that, of cutting corners. Therefore, it's not a balanced scale. You just want that one side. Or we're entitled to expect that people will respect us and treat us with honor. I mean, come on, give me dignity. Give me respect. I deserve that. But we want the ability, or we feel entitled to throw shade on people if they cross us in the wrong way. You cross me in the wrong way, I don't respect you. Forget that. I'll show you the way it is. I'm entitled to that. Or I'm entitled to give you an attitude. When I'm not treated right, I'll throw an attitude. If you don't treat me right, I'm entitled to give you an attitude back, so we imbalance the scales. See, that's not full entitlement, because we don't want to include the consequences of our attitudes and our actions when it comes to that. So it's not a balanced scale. If we live according to the full realities of entitlement, then we will be handcuffed by our own worldview. We'll be handcuffed. We often want to keep score on others. We want checks and balances on them, okay? But we don't want the same things imposed on us. We want to cancel other people. We don't want them canceling us. In our attempt to hold on to rights and entitlements, we have created a world that we cannot even measure up to personally. We can't do it. If life is primarily about what I want, what I need, what I deserve, what I'm entitled to, what I have a right to demand from others, then we'll never have peace, we'll never have fulfillment, and we'll never have satisfaction. In fact, a life of entitlement produces the opposite of what we're trying to create, the opposite of what we're hoping to create for ourselves. It produces misery instead of freedom. When we hold on and we go for entitlement, the freedom that we really want is found by surrendering our desire for keeping score on people. It's found by surrendering us counting accomplishments or one-upping everybody or owing people for what they do to us. Hey, you did this to me, I have a right to do this to you. I have a right to give back. Or earning points for what we provide for others, or making sure that everything is equal. No. The freedom that we long for, the life that we long for, it's found by surrendering our rights and entitlements. That's where it's found. So how do we do this? Well, that's the last thing we're going to look at. The very last thing we're looking at is freedom from entitlement, because that's how we want to end this thing. So in verse 15 and 16, Paul says, "Yet I have never used any of these rights." I got all these rights. I told you about all these rights, but I've never used these rights, and I'm not writing this to suggest that I want to start now. In fact, I would rather die than lose my right to boast about preaching without charge. Yet preaching the good news is not something I can boast about. I am compelled by God to do it. How terrible for me if I did not preach the good news. So if there's anybody who's entitled, it's Paul. He's the entitled one. Yet he's the very person who says he's not interested in entitlement. He has rights, but he's not even interested in using those rights. He is done with leveraging his position and title to try to get an upper hand. He's been there, done that, and he knows it just produces emptiness. He's more interested in the work that God's called him to do. And then finally, he says this in verse 17 and 18, "If I were doing this on my own initiative, I would deserve payment. But I have no choice, for God has given me this sacred trust. What then is my pay? It is the opportunity to preach the good news without charging anyone. That's why I never demand my rights when I preach the good news." Paul said he's been given a sacred trust, a responsibility to preach the gospel. And he's found something better than rights and entitlement. He's not focused on himself. He's focused on changing the life of other people through Jesus. And that's where freedom is. That's more exciting than our own rights and freedoms. He realizes when I invest in other people, when I look at what I can do to give life to other people, that's freedom and that's exciting. That's a better place to live. You see, we conquer the bondage of entitlement by living above entitlement. We can step on it. But when we participate with entitlement, we become ensnared to entitlement. It's a snare to us. It's like bondage. It reminds me of one day when I happened to be eating in the cafeteria on campus at college many years ago. I still remember, I happened to notice that the president of the college was eating there in the school cafeteria on that day. And this is probably the first time I had ever seen him there. And what really caught my attention wasn't just the fact that he was about to actually eat food in the cafeteria, because it wasn't known for being good food. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah. So that was like impressive enough in and of itself. But what really stood out to me was that he was standing in the long line to get his food. He just got in the back of the line. He was waiting. He could have easily passed to the front of the line and just kind of went in front of somebody. Hey, because he's the president of the college. Or he could have just asked somebody else to get food for him, and he could have just sat down in a special area. I mean, he was entitled to do that. He was over the entire campus. Why not? But instead of using his entitlement, he chose to live above it by waiting in the line, getting his food with everybody else, going and sitting down. And because he lived above entitlement, he also lived free from the bondage of entitlement. What a cool thing. What an amazing thing. And it's still something I remember to this day. What would it take for us to have that same freedom from entitlement? Because too many of us are bound by entitlement. You know, we can stop trying to chase or to purchase or to deserve everything we've been pursuing. We should understand that it's free through Jesus. Instead of trying to achieve security, we receive it freely through Jesus. Instead of trying to get that love and affection with our words or with romance or with willpower, hey, we can receive those things freely through Jesus. Instead of chasing that recognition and respect that has us working like 70 hours a week, hey, we can receive that recognition, that respect through the person of Jesus. You see, Jesus was the ultimate entitled one. He was God sent to the earth in the form of a human being. He was entitled, but he preached freedom from entitlement. He preached freedom from me-focused living. You see, the best physical example of this was when he unselfishly gave himself on the cross to die for you and to die for me. It was then that he fully surrendered his rights and his entitlement. And then when he rose from the dead, he basically set us free from this crazy